Kia ora, ko Justin Latif toko ingoa. I'm the Senior Communications Lead here at Community Housing Aotearoa na Whare Rao or Aotearoa, a peak body for the community housing sector. Unfortunately, our CEO Vic Crockford couldn't make it today, so you've got me instead. Welcome to our post-budget panel discussion. Now a bit about us here at CHAR. Our members develop and manage options for both affordable housing like income-based rentals and rent-to-buy and social housing with wraparound support for those who need it. They've supported over 18,000 households into a place to call home, with more being provided all the time, 70 in the last fortnight alone. But with the social housing register that has swelled by over 20,000 since 2017, they are constantly focused on how they do more. So it's appropriate then that we're having this discussion focused on the government's latest budget, particularly looking at the question, what does Budget 2022 do to recognise affordable housing as essential infrastructure for thriving communities? We're joined by two really great panellists. We have Te Matapihi's Manager of Rental Housing and Home Ownership, Jen Deben. Te Matapihi he tirohanga mō te iwi trust is the independent voice for Māori in the delivery of housing and the peak body supporting Māori community housing providers. Jen's current role involves navigating the housing ecosystem to build connections between the policy levers of government with the desire and capability of Māori. And outside of her role with Te Matapihi, Jen works more closely with Māori on the development and deployment of their strategic plans to realise the opportunities that exist within the housing system. We're also joined by Natalie Vincent, who is the Chief Executive Officer for Tangata Microfinance, a social service with a mission to strengthen New Zealanders' financial independence by providing safe, fair and affordable finance options, and advocate for fairer loans and a safer financial environment for all. Many of us are immersed in this housing crisis, whether it's working directly with housing providers, providing analysis to understand where we are, or providing the support to those who need safe and fair and affordable alternatives. With $350 million repurposed into the Affordable Housing Fund, the $1 billion cost of living package announced in the budget, I'll start with you, Jen. What were your top two observations from Budget 2020?
Thank you, Justin. So the two that really stood out for me was intergenerational wellbeing and then also the Affordable Housing Fund. So I really liked how the government is beginning to look at the nation. We are built up with families. We're not just here to look after ourselves, but we also want to be looking after our children and our grandchildren, and it's really nice to start seeing that coming into the budget. With the Affordable Housing Fund, we've known that this was on the cards for a while. We just haven't known exactly when it was going to be coming out. We know that it was coming from the COVID Response Fund, and it's really great to see how the government has pivoted and really tried to use that money in the space that it's really needed. We're hearing a lot about the stress that renters are under. We would really look forward to seeing this make a difference for them.
Now, Natalie, what were your observations from the budget?
Yeah, I do agree with Jen, actually. We were really pleased to see the investment in affordable housing, and also health, obviously, really important. So it was great to see that large investment there. We were disappointed, actually, in the lack of provision for the most financially vulnerable in New Zealand, those that are struggling the most from the cost of living crisis. It was actually great to see the cost of living package, and that there was commitment by the government to actually acknowledge that this is a crisis at the moment and to look at steps that they could put in place to address that, but it didn't go far enough and it didn't offer enough support for the people that actually need it the most.
Okay, Jen, now you're one of the leading experts on progressive home ownership and affordable rental options. Could you just explain a little bit why these options are important, and did you see anything in the budget that you think is going to support them?
What I want to focus on is the foundation that we're actually setting up, or that the government is setting up. We know that a lot of money is being spent in the highly supported area, and we call that the homelessness area, which is driven by the Homelessness Action Plan. And there are, hundreds of millions of dollars. I'm actually not sure how much the government is putting into that area, but there is a really big focus on how to manage that. If we want to get those numbers down on the homes that are under stress, the people that are living in transitional housing or emergency housing, or if we want to reduce the social housing register, the government also needs to effect change across other parts of the continuum. So where people are renting or where people are looking to buy homes. With the Affordable Housing Fund, what that does is it provides another option or opportunity for more supply to come into the market, specifically for renters, and at a lower price than what is currently being offered. That would be part of receiving that funding in order for the not-for-profit sector to build those homes. So that would give people that are living in transitional housing an option or an opportunity in order to move out of that into a more permanent home. The other thing the government has done is there's the $400 million Progressive Home Ownership Fund, and that opened in December 2020. So we can start to see where the government is beginning to use the funds that they have in order to produce additional supply, so that those people that are under housing stress have genuine supported pathways for them to move into other housing options. So is it enough though, which I think is what some people are wondering? Probably not at this point. We do have a housing crisis, we have a massive shortage, but when you couple that as well with increasing inflation, increasing interest rates, and a constrained building supply issue, it's going to be really difficult, I think, for the government to be able to balance all of those and also bring in high numbers of new supply.
Now, Natalie, I was going to just come to you and just ask about, the danger of debt and supporting people to have more control of their money is at the core of what you do at Tangata Microfinance. So, obviously household debt and housing insecurity have a huge crossover. And, there was recently a paper that I read called Rent Eats First, which is sort of talks about how rent is the primary cost for most families. What did you see in the budget that might ease people's pressure with their rental costs? And are there things that the government should be looking at going forward to address that?
Well, I don't think we saw really anything that would have an immediate impact on people's rental costs. Most of the people that we work with are renters, about 75%. They're either in private rent or social housing. And on average, they're spending about 40% of their weekly income on rent. In some cases, 60 to 70%. So, that's a huge amount out of their weekly budget. I know for many people, paying a third of your income on your housing costs is not unreasonable. But if your income is higher and can sustain that, that's probably fine. But for people who are on a really low income, and for clients that we work with, they're bringing in an average of about $730 a week. So to take out, and those are people, families, they're raising children, and that's including all of the entitlements that they can get, that's a huge chunk out of your income every week, leaving you very little to survive on. In addition to that, on average, they're repaying about 24% of their weekly income on debt. So adding their housing cost and their debt repayments together, putting it at around 60 to 70%, it leaves very little to actually live on. And in fact, it's near impossible. And I think you will have seen a report put out recently by the Fairer Future Collective that looked at numbers and refreshed numbers from the WEAG report in 2019 and showed how far families are actually going backwards every week. So those costs, those fundamental costs, your housing cost, debt repayment, food, power, you're going backwards every week. It's just not sustainable. So without real impactful change now in the budget, which we didn't see, we're keeping people in poverty, pushing more people into poverty as the year progresses.
And I mean, it's kind of bleak picture, isn't it? Because I guess we don't expect things to get better in the short term, given that inflation's expected to continue to be an issue well into this year. So is there something, I mean, what on the horizon do you think could be done as short-term measures or even medium-term to make a difference? What would you be calling on the government?
Yeah, well,
Potentially even in the next budget, when I guess will be hopefully one last chance, I guess, for families who are on the
yeah. I think that's, the commentary and opinion that I've heard on the budget talking about the cost of living crisis. I think that's one of the things that many people have highlighted, that there were some short-term measures, which, is great because that could ease pressure for some people, but there was no real long-term sort of thinking or anything that was looking like it was going to transform the outcomes for people, particularly those on low incomes, which is what we're concerned about. So the budget didn't really show that it was going to assist, the people that are the most financially vulnerable. I mean, there were some bright sparks, right? We were pleased to see the provision for the transitional housing program, the affordable housing. The query will be in the detail as that sort of rolls out later. We were pleased to see the public transport. I mean, that will make a difference. Community service card holders can now have half price transport going forward. That's locked in. That's really great, and that's a bonus to you if you live in a region or a city where there is public transport that's reliable and you use it often. It's no extra benefit or bonus to a person who lives rurally where there is no public transport. And there's a few sort of issues with that as well. I mean, I saw one person commentating that in his area with the half price adult public transport, it actually meant that a child was paying more than the adult was going on the bus. So, there's things like that need to be fixed. There should be free public transport for children. And I think that would be something that they could have done, is actually just made public transport free for a longer period of time. That would have been really helpful. I think that we were also really pleased about the dental provision, so increasing that from $300 to $1,000. Dental care is something that we often lend for because it's just a cost outside of people's capacity to be able to address. So that was really great. But the biggest takeout for me really was in this cost of living package was this $350 payment. The $350 payment, as you well know, is not being provided to those who receive a benefit. And quite frankly, I think that's unfair, it's short-sighted, and it's probably actually discriminatory. That by extending that $350 payment to those who receive a benefit, that could have had, a great impact on their budget every week and got them through. I know it's only a short period of time, but that could have eased some of the burden for them as well. And why should they be excluded? Simply because they received the winter energy payment. The winter energy payment has been in place for some time to help those who are of the lowest incomes warm their houses, keep their families safe and dry and warm over winter. That shouldn't have been held up as a reason that they couldn't receive the cost of living payment. So, I think that that's really, really unfair. But I think what we would have liked to have seen, in addition to those sort of things I've talked about, is some really, really gutsy moves around dealing with poverty and looking at that in the long term. The working for families, addressing MSD debt. There's a huge number of people that are low-income New Zealanders that are struggling every week that are paying about 8% of their benefit or their very low income toward government debt, mostly MSD debt. We know that just over 500,000 low-income New Zealanders owe about $3.5 billion to MSD. Wouldn't it have been great to have wiped that? That could have put, $40 odd back into a family's budget every week. That would have been a quick fix. We were able to, in this budget, wipe DHB debt. So it would have been great to see this MSD debt written off for people as well. And just on that, that debt to government, that MSD debt particularly is most likely to be held by females, and about 80% of those that owe working for families debt are women. So we're talking about often women who are raising children, often on their own. They're the most financially vulnerable, and they're raising the children, our future. We would have liked to have seen something really, really bold done there.
Thanks for that, Natalie. That's a really good point. Now, Jen, just looking at the budget in terms of opportunities around Māori housing opportunities, what are your observations there, and do you think there's some potential there for Māori housing providers to be able to provide more housing for their funds?
Yeah, there is. I mean, we all know that there was a significant tranche of funding available to iwi and Māori in the last budget, and that was a multi-year fund, so that's still being allocated. In this budget, there was also additional funding under He Kuku, so that is, of course, going to allow more people, more iwi and more Māori, to be delivering and also utilising the whenua. So, often it's quite difficult for iwi and Māori to build on their whenua because it is multiply owned, and so it's difficult to access finance for that. So any support that the government can give towards that is going to make a big difference. I think as well, with the affordable, just coming back to the Affordable Housing Fund, because the government is saying that's going to be for the not-for-profit sector, it actually does mean there's a great opportunity there for registered Māori community housing providers in order to access that funding and to increase their portfolios. And one of the things that I just want to say about the Māori community housing providers is they've gone through a very high level of due diligence through the government to demonstrate that they can work with government funds safely and within compliance and within the procurement rules. So there's actually a great sector there, and I think it's growing at the moment. So it's over 20 at the moment, and it's growing every month. There's a great sector there that the government can actually lean on in order to safely distribute those funds to increase housing and to also be able to unlock the whenua that iwi and Māori hold. So I think those are some really great opportunities there for government, and then also in the Progressive Home Ownership Fund as well. At the moment, Māori are struggling to access that fund. I think the government also needs to be looking at that in terms of how they can put more resources there so that Māori can engage with that fund more successfully. There's also, it was good to see in this budget that more funding is going towards trade training. So it isn't just about when we're talking about building on whenua, it's also great that the government is providing additional funds so that whānau can actually be trained up in particular trades, and then in that way they're also creating that economy where those that live locally are also able to look after the homes that are being built. And that's really key when we're trying to build more homes in the more rural or the regional areas. So there's some good things in there. But as Natalie was saying, it does come a little bit into the detail about at what point are you able to access those funds, and also how do you go through the procurement process in order to get them. Sometimes the process is so fraught and long-winded that actually by the time the funding becomes available, so many things have shifted that you almost need to start again. For those people who may have tried to access funding last year, with inflation going up and with interest rates going up, the proposal they put in last year is no longer relevant to what's happening today. And so they're having to continuously reset. And that's something that I think the government needs to look at if they're wanting people to start building at scale. How do they make it easier for them to access that funding at the time that they need it in order to make a difference?
Thanks for that, Jen. Now, what would be maybe a message that you would have for the Minister of Finance going into the over this next year and looking towards Budget 2023. Jen, what would you say? And I'll come to you next.
Yeah, it's got to be around those procurement processes, like how, if you're wanting to build at scale, if we're wanting to make a difference to the housing crisis, then you do need to be looking at more options across the continuum, so across rental housing and across home ownership. How do you unlock the potential that sits inside iwi and Māori in order for that to happen? The other thing that I'd like them to look at is more around the intergenerational well-being and the cost of living. How do you unlock or reduce the stress that is on households? I know that people are talking about lowering tax. I think that's something that needs to be part of the discussion, but it isn't just income tax that people are paying. What other taxes can be lowered? There's a lot of conversation around GST. That feels really unaffordable when it becomes, we hear about families that are living on 2-minute noodles and Weet-Bix because they can't afford to buy fruit and vegetables. So what can the government be doing in those areas, and really look at the full breadth of the levers that the government has, and not only just focusing on income tax.
Yeah, Natalie, what would you think about taking GST off fruit and veggies? And another policy that's sort of been mooted is rent controls. Is that something that Ngā Tangata would be looking at as a policy proposal?
I'm not sort of too sure on that. Look, where we sit, we're really interested in debt reduction. What's critical to us is that we have an equitable financial system that assists all New Zealanders to thrive financially, to access safe credit that's suitable for them, and to have livable incomes or benefits at rates where actually they can afford to be in charge of their own lives. So that's really what we are advocating for and what we want to see. Not all of this sort of tokenistic or band-aiding kind of, we'll give you a little bit of this and we'll give you a little bit of that, and that will help ease the pressure and this will help with that. How about paying people properly so that they can actually be in charge of their own lives, so they can purchase the food that they want to purchase for their families and eat what they want to eat and live the life that they want to live, not be reliant on accessing food banks. And I'm not saying that emergency support shouldn't be there, but I think we want to enable people. We want to be a country where people can actually make those decisions for themselves because they have a livable income. Debt reduction, really important. We want to see the government investing in financial capability. There was provision in this budget to continue with support for the building financial capability sector and community finance, but there was no increase to that, and there was certainly no provision going forward. There's sort of not a lot of provision or going forward. And wouldn't that be a great investment at this time to actually put further funding into the building financial capability sector when you've got a time where people are in financial crisis and there's a cost of living crisis, to actually put more investment into helping people with their finances? There's a lot of talk, and people are encouraging people to, if you're feeling troubled with your finances, reach out for support, see a budget service. Don't go borrowing to pay off other debt. There's other ways to address your unmanageable debt or your problem debt. But there's not enough investment that's been put into that sector. One budget service was talking the other day how they are funded by the government to see 1,000 clients a year, and last year, or 1,000 appointments, and last year they had 1,700 appointments. So that's working at nearly double their capacity, and yet there's no further investment. So I think there is, it's not just about those kind of really economic, broader economic things of should we do this with GST or should we do that. It's actually looking at this transformational change and support for particularly financially vulnerable or low-income New Zealanders, so that we can actually lift them up to thrive, to raise their children well, and to live a good life. I think that's what we want for New Zealanders, isn't it?
Now, I was just thinking, a lot of our listeners will be people who want to make a difference in their communities and want to see what you're describing, a New Zealand where everyone can thrive. What would be some things that they could maybe think about or do or put their energies towards in their communities that would help? Obviously, they don't have the same levers that Grant Robertson does, but everyone, I'm sure, can do something. What are the things that you guys maybe think about, even outside of your work, that you contribute to sort of towards those aspirations of making our communities, safer and better for everyone?
Yeah,
Jen,
That's a,
you wanna
that's a really good question. I mean, I'm an absolute advocate for serving the community as best you can with any spare time or spare money. Probably not a lot of that around at the moment, but certainly your time. We're all in this together. And whānau, helping whānau, getting out into your community. We have 28,000 registered charities in New Zealand. There's plenty of opportunity to support people in your community or services in your community to help others in need. So I would really encourage people to get out there and see what they can do in their local community to help others.
Mm-hmm. And I support what Natalie's saying as well. I was also going to be mentioning about the volunteer sector. It's a great community to be a part of, and there's great ways to find out how you can actually be supporting other charities. I would look at Do Good Jobs. And also Seek also has a lot on there. Help Tank also is another great one to look at, and you're able to filter down in terms of what skills you're able to offer and then be able to connect in with the charitable sector.
And just as we look forward towards the local body elections, is there anything that you think people should be considering as we're sort of starting to think about candidates for those and what the policies that we want them to be contributing?
For me, it would be around how you're holding your council to account. What are they doing towards increasing the supply of housing? That's another process that is quite fraught in terms of getting your building consents and your development up and running. How are councils helping you to do that? We've recently at Matapihi held wānanga with Auckland Council, and they were very supportive of the not-for-profit sector, particularly if you're a Māori community housing provider, in terms of the support that they can give you to go through the process, but also there's development contributions which they can also discount for you as well. So what is it that your local council is doing to support the supply of housing, and also how is it that the council is being held responsible in terms of looking after your community? So those would be my two.
Yeah, I would just echo what Jen had said. Do your research, absolutely vote, and look at the candidates that fit with your values and beliefs, and whether you think they're actually really caring about the well-being of their community.
And the whole community as well.
Thanks.
So there are some parts, and every local council is different. Some local councils seem more geared towards looking after the business community or the higher demographic end of the community. You need to be looking at, if you want a thriving community, you need to be looking after everybody in that community. And sometimes that means that some of your resources need to be deployed elsewhere. Even if those voices are not very strong in council, because they're not mobilised enough, that doesn't mean that they are not deserving of resources and time and energy in order to build up that sector of the community.
Hey, thanks so much for all that, guys. Our key message at Community Housing Aotearoa is one that is for the government and politicians, but also to the banks, our funders, landlords, and really all of us, that affordable homes are essential infrastructure for thriving communities. They are at the heart of communities, and when we fund them, we need to be funding them as the key defence against poor public health outcomes, against poor education outcomes, and against spiralling household debt. When we get housing right, everything else starts to work. So as politicians and as people working in the NGO sector developing policies, let's think about the next generation and ensuring we have that infrastructure in place for them. Now, thank you everyone for listening. In the next month, we'll be launching a podcast called Right at Home, Realising a Future Where All New Zealanders Are Well Housed. And it'll be focused on the challenges facing this country around housing, looking at where we are at now, what are some of the solutions to these issues, as well as talking to those on the front lines as we have today, trying to ensure the system works for everyone. Our first episode will be on progressive home ownership, about what is it, how is it a different way to fund people into their own homes, and what community housing providers have had success they've had in developing this model. So once again, thank you for your time, and until next time, once again, thank you for your time, and until next time, haere rā, and thank you from all of us here at Community Housing Aotearoa.